Welcome, everyone, to the South African Film Festival for Australia and New Zealand. I'm Collins Rex. I'm one of the members of the steering committee, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by what can only be described as an iconic South African artist. And I'm sure you will all immediately recognize the face. But welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today, David Kramer. I'm really keen to chat to you today about your music, where it's come from, where it's going to, and also just in general to talk about music in South Africa and some of those remarkable musicians that you've unearthed over the last few years, people that you've worked with and have introduced to a wider audience than they would normally have had. But let's start with you. So you study textile design, and then you end up making your living on the stage. How on earth did that come about?
Well, I wanted to study. I was looking for a bursary to do that. And in the town where I lived was a textile factory, and they offered a bursary, and I applied. I got that bursary, and they sent me to Leeds University to study textile designing. So I went there in 1971, and it was a wonderful experience for me. Suddenly I was outside of the repressive South African environment that I'd grown up in, and I was exposed to all sorts of things, politics and culture in particular. Spent a lot of time catching up with what was actually going on in the world. You must remember we didn't have television at that time.
Absolutely.
We were absolutely isolated. And of course, a lot of propaganda, brainwashing was taking place as I grew up. So it was a very liberating time for me. And I started to write my first songs while I was at the university, and performed. I started to find my voice, the voice that I suppose people know me as today. The David Kramer South African sound that I've created over the years, and so I started to experiment with that there. I suppose when I arrived, I was still, like many other musicians, doing cover versions of other people's songs, the usual Cat Stevens, whatever was popular in the early 70s. But I then was performing at folk clubs at the university and around Leeds. And I started to talk about myself as a white South African, which was quite a daring thing to do at the time. We weren't the most popular species on the planet. And people, and I used humor, I used satire to win the audience. I satirized my experience. So I had 3 years of developing the early Kramer songs, and some of which, as I say, were satirical, and some which lent perhaps more to social commentary and politics and so on. So when I came back to South Africa, I had to go back to my hometown and work in the textile factory. But I started coming through to Cape Town and performing, and people sat up and took notice because they'd never heard anything like this before. It was, and they'd never seen a character like me. I had a look which was completely antithetical to anything that most people were aspiring towards here. You see, most the musicians in South Africa at that time were all wanting to be something else. They still are, but then it was quite, everybody wanted to pretend they were from California or somewhere else,
And your voice was absolutely unique. I mean, it would have been, and when I cast my mind back to when I was much younger living in South Africa and first hearing you, there was nothing else like you out there. I mean, we couldn't see you at the very beginning because, you know, television came in 1976. But by the time you released Bakhat, so Bakhat comes in 1980 and gets no airplay initially because it's promptly banned by the SABC. And it's banned for all sorts of reasons. And I always find the reasons of bannings very interesting. It wasn't just the content of your songs and the fact that there was satire and political commentary, but it was the use of language and the fact that you mixed languages. I mean, this was anathema. You didn't mix languages, you know, you kept your languages pure. And there you were, Afrikaans one moment, English the next moment, what today we tend to refer to as Afrikaans, you know, this language that we'd never heard coming over the airwaves before. When you started out writing songs in your own voice, when you've moved beyond that folk genre, singing Cat Stevens songs, and you find the Kramer voice, did you set out to do that, or was that just a natural way for you to write? Was that just the way you spoke at the time, and therefore that is the voice that you used in your music?
Yes, well, it's my voice. And so I didn't indulge in any pretentiousness. So that was the difficult choice, because people found that really strange, the flat South African accent to be used in songs. It's not the easiest accent to sing in. It's not easy on the ear, even when it's spoken, I suppose. But I think it's not just so much as it's because I have I think there's an artistic approach to it. I think like an artist, and I'm thinking, okay, so what is it that I really want to do here? I'm not just trying to entertain people with songs. I'm really trying to speak about my experience as an artist. So the truthfulness and the authenticity of that is what becomes really important. It's not just reaching for something else. It's not reaching for to be noticed or whatever. It's a form of expression, and as an artist, I can only be respond to my environment, respond to my background, respond to my environment, and kind of deal with the issues at hand through this persona that I develop, which is David Kramer, but not.
Yeah.
I unlike some of the others like Koetzee Bass and Johannes Kerkorrel and Hannepoort van Tonde and so on. I didn't think at the time to choose a sort of a pseudonym for myself, and maybe that would have been in some ways easier, where you have a sense of a character, because at one point I was a character, but that was also me, and that becomes psychologically a little bit difficult to deal with. At that time, as I developed that and made the choices of the khaki trousers, the very wide khaki trousers, the narrow tie, the rolled up white sleeves, the little waistcoat and so on. Those were all conscious choices that I made because I wanted my image to reflect the music I was making, the songs I was writing. So I was living that as well. It wasn't something I put on over the weekend and then went back to, other clothes that's what I looked like at any time of the day, any time of the week.
Yeah, it wasn't a costume that sort of came off at the end of your working day.
I was living the character. I was very much, I was the character. I was, but as one gets older and time goes on, I'm not that persona anymore. I share the name, but I'm not the guy on the bicycle with the Royal schooner anymore.
Yeah, and I think that is is something that comes with a certain maturity, but it's also a conscious decision that you can't be that for the rest of your life. David Kramer he's a man with other ambitions and other.
Well, I went into theatre.
You know?
I mean, I became other things as well. I became a writer of musicals and a director of musicals, and so yes, I started to wear different hats.
Literally,
not just this one.
And let's go with the musicals. So, 1986. You start your remarkable collaboration with Taliep Petersen, who tragically is taken from us all in 2006. But in the time that you work with him, you create such memorable music, and you create these worlds on the stage, starting with District 6. And you have a whole other David Kramer that emerges as a result of the musicals that are being created. Tell us about that, David. Tell us about those worlds and the amazing stories, because you're such a storyteller, you know. I mean, even your individual songs are all little vignettes that are just so poignant at the same time as being really funny and outrageous. And then you expand that into this whole world on a stage, and you work with Taliep. So how did that come about? And talk us through some of that work.
So I became very aware that I was a storyteller, and that the songs were very much about characters and places that the characters find themselves in, and stories. I mean, they were little epic stories, Bochum and Futsek or Stanley and Dikui or whatever they were, but there always was some kind of character description and character action involved. And in the early 80s, I was very friendly with the theatre director, Barney Simon, at the Market Theatre in Johannesburg. And he pointed out to me that, he emphasized that I was a storyteller, and that because I wrote for characters, I should perhaps think about allowing other singers to interpret my songs. And that was a bit of a revelation for me, to think, okay, well, maybe my songs could work for someone else. And we did a show together in 1985 with Barney as the director, and I had Jennifer Stein and Elsie Zitzman helping me in that show, singing. And so I rewrote some of the songs to put as a female voice and to allow them to sing. And this is where Elsie first sang So Long Skipskop, which I'd written at that time. And so some of the other songs I'd taken and then just, gave it a different point of view so that a woman could sing these songs. And I liked that. And I thought that's interesting, because suddenly the singing voices allow me to write in a different way. And the fact that I'm so interested in stories, and I'm very much, I like performing in theatres. I don't see myself sort of as a pop artist performing at outdoor concerts and, like a lot of other people were doing. I'd done that, but it wasn't, what I preferred doing was performing a concert, which was a 2-hour concert, and which I presented my songs with my band, whatever. But it wasn't kind of like your usual sort of pop concert. Let me say, it was more theatrical. So that started me thinking about, well, what about writing something like a musical, and maybe. At the very first idea that I had was, I thought, okay, well, I've got this big hit song, The Royal Hotel. I've got another hit, Hakon Blokkies. There's the characters in the Royal Hotel. Maybe I could develop a story around an old rugby player, like in the story of Blokkies Bear.
Yeah.
And I'd released an album, a kind of a themed album on Blokkies. So I thought that could be the first musical. And I showed Barney Simon the first ideas that I had in drafts. And Barney was, he was a challenging director, and he challenged me to such a point that I kind of walked away from it.
Mm.
Okay. And then, so I left that for a while, the idea of writing a musical. And then in 1986, I was reading a newspaper up in Johannesburg, and I saw it was in February, and it was the 11th of February, and they were saying that this was the 20th anniversary of the declaration of District 6 as a white group area. And I started to think about that, and I thought, wow, no one talks about that anymore.
Yeah.
And it was only 20 years later, the place has been, razed to the ground. It's just this wound in the heart of Cape Town. And the more I thought about it, I thought, it's got all, it has an interesting political story to tell. It has different musical styles. I could think of a few musical styles that were popular, and then the roots of Afrikaans music really begin in a place like District 6.
Absolutely.
That was my interest. My interest was in roots Afrikaans music. So I thought this would make a good idea for a musical, and so I started to read up on it and research it, and found photographs and books and as much as I could, and started creating characters and ideas around it. But I quickly realized that, not coming from District 6, and, I had no claim to District 6 whatsoever. And even in those years, the political climate would have been such that, for me to come along and start speaking on behalf of the people from District 6 wasn't going to be very cool and not acceptable. So, and then, as I don't know why these things happen, but I was watching a film as part of my research called Grandfather, Your Right Foot is Missing, film about District 6. And Taliep was there, and I knew Taliep from, as a musician, and from previous times we'd played together. And I said to him, I've got this idea about writing a musical. And I said, because I know you were involved, you created a review show. He says, yeah, I want to write a musical as well. And I'm going to revive my carnival. And I said, well, why don't we, let's get together. I'll show you some of the things I've done. And then let's see, maybe we can work. And so he came to my place, to my house, and I played him. I'd written the song Brucci Me Bra already. And I played him that, and that made a good impression on him. And I showed him some of the lyrics I'd written and some of the characters I'd developed. And he was suspicious of me.
I'm sure, yeah.
Of my motives. He thought, what do I want? What am I trying to get out of this? And I wasn't really keen to work with anyone else. I was a solo artist, writing in my own way. And the idea of writing with someone else was going to be a big challenge for me. Anyway, we found our feet, and I gave him lyrics. He put music to the lyrics. First lyric I gave him was 7 Steps of Stone, and he wrote a beautiful melody to that.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the other, and I said, we need this song. We need like a real guma, kind of a klopse, that kind of walking through the streets when the klopse walk at New Year. He said, chocolates, that's easy. I've already got a song, he said, called It's New Year. Okay, so listen to that. And I said, no, but we need this one. We need something different to that. And then the next day he came back with a melody of The Heart of District 6, which has become known as Klop Klop. and it goes clop, clop, baby. So he gave me this melody, and it was, for me, it was quite difficult because I know how to write lyrics to the melody, and it was difficult because it go da 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 dee 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 da da. What are you going to put on that?
Yeah, nothing like making it easy for you.
Yeah. So that was the challenge, and I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed finding testing myself in a different way to write to other people's to his melodies and not my own.
And I can imagine that it would have been a huge challenge. But once you've got the first one out there, did you think, this is it now, I've done this, I'm moving on to other stuff? Or did you know immediately that you were on to something really special?
It took over our lives, It was something like this had never really happened in Cape Town and South Africa before. It was the success of the musical was overwhelming. As I say, it took over our lives. It created a completely new audience for the theatre. In hundreds of thousands of people came to see that musical from all walks of life. Each success led to the next. And in the 90s, we then wrote the musical, almost an operatic, sung through musical Poison and then we did a show called Crooners, and that was the first part of the 90s. And then eventually we'd been to Malaysia with Poison, and then coming back on the aeroplane, we had this idea about telling the story of an old man who had been in a vocal harmony group in the late 50s, early 60s. And so we set about writing Cut and the Kings. And that was in 1995, almost 10 years later, after District 6. And then, as you might know, that became our big international hit, going eventually to London, to the West End, winning the Laurence Olivier Award, and then also being taken up by Broadway and running on Broadway for nearly 6 months. Toured Europe, all over Europe. That kept us busy again for almost another 10 years. 2005, we wrote a musical called Guma, about the roots of Afrikaans music in the Cape, and the beginnings of the language, the beginnings of the music, they all connected. And that was an enormous hit for us here in the Cape, and was invited to London as well. And we performed it in London, but that was in 2006. And Taliep came for the opening, went back to Cape Town after the opening night. That was on a Thursday. And on the Saturday, he was murdered. That's what happened there. And that was the end of our relationship. Writing musicals, absolute tragic.
Absolutely.
It was just so. It's something I live with. I think about him every day. But that was the end of our musical partnership.
I mean, apart from the man's life, which is ripped away, but this amazing creation which has just ended, it must have been incredibly difficult for you, and still, I'm sure every day you must. It's one of the tragedies of our times. I think that these sorts of things happen, and that you have to live with it. But Taliep is gone. It's 2006. In the meanwhile, you've also started working with musicians from the Karoo, and you've started exploring even more deeply the roots music from that part of the country. Mm-hmm. Tell us about Karoo Guitar Blues.
Well, that came about because there was a filmmaker, Jan Horn, and he wrote to me saying he's making this music series on the different kinds of music in South Africa. He actually wanted me to be sort of the host or narrator of the music from the Boerkaap, the Malay choirs, that kind of thing. And I felt uncomfortable with that. I said I didn't think I was the right person to talk about that music, but I was interested. He said that he also wanted to go into the Karoo and look for what he called the Karikimense, and those sort of, people, itinerant laborers, sheep shearers, their music, and which is a music that I'd heard when I was a child. That almost the first Afrikaans music I heard, came. I heard the farm laborers strumming the guitars outside my father's shop or inside the shop sometimes, and so I just said, look, I mean, I don't think those people exist anymore. He said, no, well, let's see if we can find them. And I'd been interested even since my university days to do something like that, because I'd read about what the Lomax family had done with going to, find musicians, forgotten musicians, and record them and so on. And I thought I might do that when I came back from university, but it was difficult, the politics, and I didn't really pursue the idea until Jan Horn asked me, and it was about 2000, he approached me. And anyway, he went off on a long drive and he came back and he said, I found some people and, let's go. And I set off with him. I think we must have covered about 10,000 Ks
Wow.
in that, yeah. And he took me to various places, and he made a film with me performing with these people and talking to them and asking about the music. And then I showed them there was one guitar player named Hannes Coetzee, and he played the guitar, a slide guitar with a teaspoon in his mouth. So I showed this video to my wife, Renee, and she said, well, that's amazing. You should bring him on stage and let people see him perform. So she had this great idea. And I thought, okay, well, let's give it a try. I'm not sure how this will work. But I mean, if it doesn't work, then I can still, I can just keep playing,
Yeah.
I can just if it doesn't. So I invited 3 of these musicians from different parts of the country to join me on stage at a festival in Oudtshoorn called KAK&K. And we went to that. And again, it was one of those things, where, and it had such an impact. Again, people had never seen anything like this before.
No, I mean, it's phenomenal to see. It's just, it's actually quite mind-blowing.
It just blew their socks off. It was so unique, so authentic. People were crying in, the tears, and it reached somewhere else. It wasn't an entertainment. It was a kind of a revelation and a cathartic experience. And in fact, Brayton Breitenbach was at one of those first concerts, and he was blown away. He came and embraced us all and said, you've just got to do more of this. This is so important. You've got to do this. And so it became a sort of a project for me, and a series of concerts and more traveling and finding more musicians and presenting concerts from 2001 over the next 9 years or so. We made a documentary, maybe, and some of these videos that you've seen, you might see from those times. So I brought in the tin can violin players from the Kamisberger, Cederberg, and so on. These old instruments, which are Coetzee instruments, and they're hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they're three-stringed. They look like violins, and they've been played up there in those mountains for a long time. So again, it resonated with my idea of roots music.
And that is true roots music, because it's really pure in that it's almost been isolated from outside influences, insofar as you can in this current environment where, things are pervasive. But just seeing people who play instruments that you've never seen before and play instruments that you have seen in a completely different way, just watching the recordings is incredible. It must have been absolutely mind-altering for people who saw the shows the first few times, and everyone that saw them subsequently. It would have been like, wow, I can understand how Breitenbach said to you, "Well, keep doing more of this stuff," because once it's gone, it's also gone forever.
When I started to meet with these people, it was already too late, unfortunately. This was the last generation that sort of still performed this music. A lot of them were of an age where they'd given up. They didn't have instruments anymore. The poverty, the grinding poverty, had eradicated a lot of the joy of making music. People didn't make it anymore. So, it was interesting to see what happened with the few that I managed to involve myself with and to bring to the cities and to put them on stage and present them. Some of us went over. We went to Holland with Hannes Coetzee and with Mary Kriel to a festival there. And also Hannes and I went to Seattle in America to a slide guitar convention there. So it was interesting. And, people like that had suddenly their lives changed completely. But as I say, it was the end of an era, and technology encroaches and destroys this kind of old folk culture. And of course, in a country like ours, where there's no support or encouragement to this for this sort of thing, it struggles to survive.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much you would find today if you went out today.
It is actually tragic to think that it's something which is lost to time, and some of your recordings and the video footage that exists is probably some of the very last that ever will, and we can only experience it now through that sort of recorded medium. The people are not producing the music anymore because they're gone, and they haven't passed it on to new generations. And that's the tragedy of music of that kind, that if there's no one to pass it to, it just dies, it's gone forever.
Yeah. What was interesting and encouraging was from that, there was a man called Elias Nel who started to revive the dance form of the music, real dance.
Mm-hmm.
And he created a competition with the assistance of an Afrikaans cultural organization, and they started to have an annual competition in Paarl at the Taal Monument. They've got a lovely amphitheater, and then they started to bring in these teams from different places to dance the music. to dance in the, you know, it's a
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
kind of,
I know the form. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an old form of a trance dance that has kind of evolved into when it met up with, I suppose, Western influences, the kind of jig and clog dancing that might have arrived here on the boats in 1700s or whenever. So this also nearly died out, and through the work that he did, he turned it into an annual festival and revived, because of the competitive nature of it, revived the interest amongst young people to dance this dance, and they're still doing it. And there are, musicians that play along with them. Not quite the same quality that, I haven't really found other music, but I haven't attended for a while now. But anyway, that is one thing that did continue and is still alive. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, that is really great to hear, because it means that something is continuing, and hopefully having the dance form that encourages the music, and encourages people to play the music and maybe even recreate some of the instruments. And so, David, what's next for David Kramer? What are you doing now? What are you planning to do next? I always get a little bit nervous when people have autobiographies, because it's like, surely that's not the end. There's a lot more to come. So what happens now? What's on the cards for you?
Well, firstly, at the moment I'm performing again. I've done a few solo performances over the last few months as the COVID. It doesn't seem as dangerous as it was. We've started to venture out into live performance again, and I've done a few solo concerts, and I will be performing at this festival in Oudtshoorn in 2 weeks' time. I'll do another 2 shows there at the Kaka and Ka. And then I have 1 or 2 other private shows that I'm doing. But so that's, we've come out of a difficult time, as you know. I was in 2020 when COVID hit and, everything shut down. It was like, the carpet was pulled out under my feet, and I was at suddenly my musical came to a grinding halt. And nobody knew what was going to happen. And for a long time, we were in isolation. Everybody knows what that's been like. And it's only recently that we started to sort of creep out and experiment again. During that period, I didn't feel like writing anything. I had no feeling to embark on another project. And so I started painting. I just did a series of paintings to keep myself busy.
That's something a little bit different there.
Different, yeah. My brother's a painter, and I mean he's known as an artist who paints. So I didn't really want to venture into that arena, but I did it to pass the time. And I don't think it's something I'll probably continue to paint now and again. But it's not, I'm not going in, to now become a visual artist. That's not what I think I'm into. So at the moment, I'm just, I can't really tell you where it's headed. I try and keep an open mind, and I'll see what comes up next. And if there's something exciting, I have a good idea that I want to investigate or play with, then I'll do so. But right now, it's still early. It's the early part of coming out and trying to find one's feet again as a performing artist. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been very nice to talk to you, and I wish you all the success with your film festival, the South African Film Festival, Australia, New Zealand.
Thank you.
That's great.
And it's always a lot of fun. We managed to get some really interesting films always, and it's really great to involve people, not just South Africans who happen to be living in this part of the world, but it's the others, it's the Australians who really don't know anything about South Africa, who get just a tiny glimpse into what South Africa is all about through the eyes of filmmakers. And that's what the South African Film Festival is really all about. And it's also great to get to talk to people like you as part of the festival. So thanks so much, David. And we look forward to seeing what you have in store for us next. Good luck with it all, and may the theatres be at full capacity sooner rather than later.
Thank you.